12th for the 10th, 2024. The time is 9:07, and there is news and a very many thread at which we need to pull in the weird and wacky world that is F1. Kimi Antonelli has some stuff to say, setting his strategic objectives as far as the 2025 season is concerned. He's here not for a long time, but for a good time. He's here to take names and indeed win races, he says. Podiums and race victories in his maiden voyage of a season. Oh, the humanity. Toto Wolff has chimed in talking about how Mercedes mismanaged his FP1 session this year at Monza, setting expectations too high, saying that Kimi Antonelli up until that moment had been brilliant. He hadn't made any mistakes, hadn't put a foot wrong, hence why they set expectations too high. But in retrospect, with the benefit of hindsight, which of course is always 2020, Toto Wolff has said they mismanaged it. We will come to that, I promise. And also, first order priority on the docket is Mattia Binotto's interview, where he's talked about a very many things, not least whether he would have signed Sir Lewis Carl Davidson Hamilton had he still been team principal of one Scuderia Ferrari, and he had something controversial to say. Oh, the humanity. Let's talk about Kimi Antonelli first and foremost, because he's revealed a couple of different things. He's spoken very honestly and earnest to Autosport, talking about his weaknesses, not insubstantial ones. So too is he talked about what triggered Mercedes having confidence in him sufficient to test him in FP1 as soon as this season. He said, first and foremost, reflecting on his testing progress in 2022 in an interview with Festival dello Sport in Italy, organised by Gazzetta dello Sport, again very techie, if indeed we're saying all F1 publications are made equal, but some are made more equal than others. Antonelli said during TPC testing of previous cars that one thing that impressed Mercedes was how quickly he was able to expedite for his learning curve, that he got straight to the limit, needed no settling in period, reminiscent of one Max Emilian Verstappen though. Anybody that's ever worked with Max says that there is no bedding in period, no warming up, no playing your way into the crease when it's Max Verstappen. The second that he gets in the car, he's right on the limit. Kimi Antonelli, Mercedes engineers and Antonelli now say that that's how he has been in testing of previous cars thus far this season. He says he got straight to the limit, worked out quickly how he could get to the target lap times that Mercedes wanted. No bedding in period. And this feels like this is the Franco Colapinto effect now. Do you know what I mean? That many moons ago, as recently as 24 months ago, when there were seats on the F1 grid, that nobody wanted to give new blood a chance. They would always defer to a K-Mag or a Nico Hulkenberg, a tried and tested, had somebody who had experience because it was deemed less risky. Now, however, you put Colapinto in the car and he nails it. He's breathing right down the neck of somebody who everybody rates very highly in the Anglo-Thai Alex Albon, and now everybody wants into Rookie PLC. That's the new Bitcoin of Formula One. Everybody wants to be invested. Colapinto could be on the grid next year. Lawson will be, Behrman, Antonelli, Jack Doohan. Indeed, there could be 5 on the grid next year. That's 25%. This is something of a paradigm shift, if you ask me. But I digress. Kimi Antonelli continues. I have to say that the factor on which I struggled the most during testing, however, was race pace. Because the one thing that I impressed them with, however, was my ability to expedite for my learning curve. However, in the last 2 days of testing at Spa, I improved my race pace considerably, and that pushed Mercedes to sign me for 2025, replacing, of course, the not insubstantial shoes of Sir Lewis Carl Davidson Hamilton. Oh, the humanity. Until that moment, continues Antonelli, they had an idea that they wanted to put me in a Mercedes car in 2025, but this was the crystallization moment. But first, they wanted to see if I could improve for my weaknesses, and that's what I did at Spa, says Antonelli. During these Spa tests, I made a good step forward and improved my race pace sufficient to where they became convinced. In fact, before the summer's break, I had a call from Toto Wolff, my engineer, and other people from Mercedes. It was them telling me that I would be the driver, one of their drivers for 2025, stepping into the not insubstantial shoes of one Sir Lewis Hamilton. Delaney, it's chaos, eh? Joe P. We'll get to Binotto in short order, I promise you, because it's techie. He had more things to say. Antonelli spoke about his weaknesses to remember he's a rookie, that he needs to focus on his attention span and concentration. It will be important to learn, he says, how not to lose concentration when somebody's talking to you over the radio, as an example. In testing, they were talking to me more and more with a view to acclimatise, help me get used to that. Because why? Because in F1 it's crucial to learn the procedures so that when they ask you to change, you have bandwidth enough to do it and not lose pace and or focus. These are all things that I'm learning, says Antonelli, and getting used to, so that I'm also doing it in the tests, not only to improve as a driver, but to learn a lot about the procedures, settings, brake bias, engine mode, et al. Mercedes is going to send me a steering wheel, he says, and a small simulator at home, bless him, to learn how to do the race starts. So we'll practice. The steering wheel is the formula, the official one, the one that I'll be using next year, so it will help me memorize the buttons as well. Why? Because he doesn't want to do a King George Russell, first of his name, at Australia this year, where he was twiddling around looking down at the steering wheel and then ended up getting brake tested, quasi brake tested, by one Fernando El Panalonso, a man from Oviedo, Astoria. At high speeds, he says, you just don't have time to look at the wheel. You have to know it by heart. Well, yeah, Kimi Antonelli, you want to tell that to your old mate, your driving partner next year, King George Russell, eh? Can you be friends with drivers, he was asked. And this is something that keeps cropping up, by the way. Eddie, what are you saying? Keeps cropping up. I heard Lando Norris talk not too long in a New York Times article, and he said something to this effect: yeah, of course I can be mates with Max Verstappen. Because why? Well, because if I'm mates with Max Verstappen, that makes me want to beat him even more. Lando Norris says he doesn't buy into this thesis that you have to hate every single one of the other 19 drivers if you want to beat them, put them under the dirt each and every single race weekend. He argues that being friends with them makes him want to beat them more. Antonelli disagrees, however. He says, when asked, can you be friends with drivers, Antonelli says, and this I think is telling, harks back to the old ones, the Sennas, the Schumachers, the Prosts even. He says, out of the track, it is possible. When you're outside of the cockpit, yeah, you can take private jets to and from race tracks if indeed you want to, as does Lando Norris with Maximilian Verstappen. But Antonelli says, on track, you cannot be friends when you're on track. You don't look into anyone's eyes. Even if you're a teammate, on the contrary, you want to beat him even more because he's your teammate. Outside of the cockpit, yeah, you can be friends with some drivers, but on track, it's just you and no one gives you any favours. You have to do your job for yourself and your team. And I love that. Let's go, Kimi Antonelli. Do you know what I mean? That's the way I want to hear somebody talk. Lando Norris, take a leaf out of that fella's book. And I know George Russell is a killer. I only need to go and ask Jack Aitken as far as the way that dude overtakes and his ruthlessness and his aggression. But sometimes aggression and ruthlessness begets aggression and ruthlessness. Andrea Kimi Antonelli next year, as at 2025, is not coming to play. That fella is coming to take names, and I like the cut of his jib, if that's anything that you can go by. When asked, you may not know because you just started, but how are the drivers as far as their personalities? Sometimes the interviewer asks, the drivers can come across a bit wooden, say. Maybe Max Verstappen. How is he in real life? Because on the podium, he looks a bit wooden, says this interviewer. Yes, responds Kimi Antonelli. I must say Verstappen is very nice, contrary to popular belief. I spoke to him a couple of times, and I must say he's super likeable. I even play with him on the simulator. Oh, so this is in stark contrast to the man that we see on the podium, says the interviewer. Exactly, indeed. I turn on the simulator and strangely, he's always online. Sometimes me and Max drive together, and as at the time of writing, we have never pushed each other off the track, luckily. Andrea Kimi Antonelli, very techie. Oh, and by the way, because Toto Wolff has chimed in on this, hasn't he? Speaking of his inability to manage Kimi Antonelli in real time during FP1, his maiden voyage in Monza, saying of that, Toto, the boy who cried, said, "I wouldn't say it was a mistake, but I think we weren't completely right in assessing the pressures that he could find himself under." Houseway. I can't even believe when you hear people talk about Toto Wolff and his brilliance, his commercial mindedness, his resilience, his ability to get things over the line. Beggars belief, hey, that he could put an Andrea Kimi Antonelli, notwithstanding the fact that hitherto he had made no mistakes, but that they thought it would be a good idea to put that dude in FP1 at his home Grand Prix, at the Italian Grand Prix, Monza track, that they thought it was a good idea to put that dude on soft compound tyres with a view to let him go out and set purple sectors on a brand newly resurfaced track where the curbs had been doctored and tinkered. This makes no sense. I love myself a bit of Toto, the boy who cried wolf, but sometimes this doesn't match up. The theory and the practice, the person who people say who he is, people infinitely closer to the paddock and the circumstance than I ever will be, doesn't match up with the reality. This was a mistake of epic proportions. I wouldn't say it's a mistake. How do you work that out, Toto, the boy who cried wolf? Why is that, Toto says? We talked about it, how to approach the session. He's been brilliant in testing as Kimi Antonelli. He's never put a single foot wrong in the many thousands of kilometres that he's done, meaning therefore that up until that point in FP1 at the Italian Grand Prix, Kimi Antonelli had not made a mistake. He'd impressed engineers when they talk about him, say that he's a generational talent in F3. Karun Chandok affirmed this. It makes sense therefore, but past his prologue, sometimes rookies will go out there and put it into the barrier, yeet it. Colapinto did the same, did he not? So too Ollie Behrman. These guys need experience and practice, arms around them, safeguarding. But it's a different ball game, says Toto Wolff. If you're an Italian driver, you're 18 years old in Monza and it's your first opportunity. Go on then, Toto. Surely you knew this before you sent him out. This is perfect information that you and Mercedes had before you sent Andrea Kimi Antonelli out to seat it on the back of the combined exit of one Parabolica. This makes no sense. Toto continues, made if we considered that as a risk factor and accounted for some extra margin of error against the set of data that we had for him, probably it would have been wise to give him an FP1 that would have been a totally different time zone than Italy. But he and we will learn from that. No kidding, Sherlock. Like, what are we doing here? Perfect information that if Toto is the god tier mind that everybody says he is, he would have baked into the calculations in real time. This makes no sense. Everybody can be a brilliant Monday morning quarterback. Everybody is an F1 genius after the fact. But surely Toto, if he is the man that everybody says he is, has the ability to think this F1 equation through in real time and therefore act accordingly. He was so quick, and that was his first session talking about the upside. And again, there's not insubstantial upside as far as Andrea Kimi Antonelli. Nobody's not going to tell me that he's not rapid. Everybody says he's super quick. Lest we forget, during FP1 early in that session, he took the quickest minimum speed through half of those turns going through Monza. Even at the end of FP1, not many drivers had taken the same speeds that he managed to through bloody Parabolica and the Lesmos. Do you know what I mean? And Barriante, or whatever that other chicane is called, the penultimate one, the left-right hander before Parabolica. Do you know what I mean? He's quick, but then manage him, surely, Toto. You can't have this. This can't go wrong. This is a very costly, potentially expensive experiment. Manage him, therefore, lest you be doomed to repeat the mistakes of Christmas past. So too many rookies' careers have gone out to pasture, right? Failed at the first hurdle. Please see a Nicholas Latifi. Please see a Logan Sargent as your exhibit A's and B's. But I digress. Look, Toto says he was so quick first session. He was about to be announced as driver, and there was press and furore around that, wasn't it? I like his approach. He's fast on the first lap out the pits. Maximilian Verstappen settings. I think they're putting too much pressure on this chap, you know, Eddie. I'll be honest. I feel like they're putting far too much pressure on him. Now people want Antonelli to beat George because they don't like him, only because he was trying to be the best driver. I don't hate what you're saying there, Eddie. He's an F1 driver, is George. He's coming for a lot of stick. I get why people dislike George Russell. King George Russell, first of his name, but yeah, and still, man, he's been an F1 driver and trying to maximise for his opportunity, get himself 25 points each and every single race weekend. And I don't hate that. How can I be an F1 and hate that? I want all of the drivers to do their best, optimise for their opportunity. But I think, I'll say all that to say this. I think the fact that everybody's talking so much about Kimi Antonelli, Behrman, Lawson, Colapinto, is again, that speaks to that paradigm shift in the way that these team principals, these F1 insiders are all of a sudden looking at the next generation of driver. Not long ago, it was Théo Pourchaire and Felipe Drugovich left on the sidelines, notwithstanding the fact that Felipe Drugovich was a dominant F2 champion. Now, however, by virtue of some very fortuitous circumstances, that the racing gods have smiled upon Colapinto, giving him the opportunity to supersede one Logan Sargent, who was an underperformer materially in real time. By virtue of that very fortuitous circumstance, Colapinto has proved that these F2 dudes are ready. Give these rookies a chance. You don't know how high their potential upside is, do you? How can you know until you put them in the car? Colapinto has proven over the course of the past 3 races that he has to, James Vowles has to feel vindicated in allowing him in that car. Should have done it bloody sooner. How many lives can Logan Sargent have? How many times could Logan Sargent yeet it into the barrier? How much money was he going to cost an already cash-strapped Williams before you put somebody else in that car? Franco Colapinto is already proving by virtue of his ability to breathe down one Alex Albon's neck that he was the one, he's the guy, and you need to give these guys a chance. You hear Helmut Marko saying similar, right, when talking about 2025 and who he wants in that car alongside one Maximilian Verstappen. Of course he wants youth. Of course it's Lawson, or it could be a Hajar, or it could be a Arvin Lindbland. They're talking about this now like these are very real possibilities, and fair play to them. Thank God they've realised, because it's too shameful that F1 producers and broadcasters keep zooming in on Théo Pourchaire and bloody Felipe Drugovich on the Aston Martin pit wall with those headphones on, as if somehow this looks like the experience that they need to be getting in real time. It is not. There is no substitute for time spent behind the wheel in the cockpit as far as Formula One experience is concerned. Oh, and by the way, there was a cheeky test session that not a lot of people are talking about. On Tuesday it was rain at Mugello, and on Wednesday the conditions freed up. They're testing courtesy of Pirelli, running tests in tandem to make sure that they have all their I's dotted and T's crossed as far as the requisite set of rubber compounds, tyres for next year, right? And they completed laps. Involved in the test was Carlos Sainz Jr., Charles Leclerc, Liam Lawson and Lando Norris, each in their respective cars. Here were the times. Almost 400 laps were completed over the course of the day, with Norris topping the mileage charts, 118 laps and a best time of 121.3, followed by Liam Lawson, who did 116 laps at this Pirelli test. His fastest time, though, 123.2. 2 seconds adrift of Lando Norris. And listen, whatever you want to read into this, it's techie because you don't know the variables. How consistent were they? Are we comparing apples with apples or apples with oranges? Don't get too much data on this. But again, if you need more context, Leclerc completed 79 laps. His quickest was a 121.053. Remember, Lando's was a 121.3. Charles was a 121.0. So that sounds like that's ballpark right. Not that necessarily they're got all balls out 10 tenths, but the fact that Lando's and Leclerc's times were quite close, within 3 tenths. That makes sense, eh? Carlos Sainz, though, 121.8. As near as makes no difference, a 121.9. And therefore Liam Lawson, bloody Nora, a second and a half adrift of the slowest guy in Carlos Sainz Jr. Take from that what you will. It's a bit techie, eh? Let's go. It's very, very techie, this. I don't know what to make. What's going on? McLaren F1 race, aka Pope San Miguel. Hope you're good, because by the way, we've got another topic to talk to. Audi and Mattia Binotto is giving an interview and he's dropped a couple of bombshells. It's very techie, this. I don't even know where to start. So, okay, look, in the interview, Mattia Binotto, lest we forget for context, Mattia Binotto has been appointed as CTO, COO of Audi F1. currently is at the time of writing Sauber, and it is a project. Why? Because Sauber don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the personnel, they don't have anything. And Binotto attested this, saying that he's most reminded of the Ferrari project in the early 90s, that this is a root and branch project. It needs rebuilding from the bottom up. Everything needs to be thrown out and they just need to start again. I think Mattia Binotto, as he said in an interview recently, didn't realise the extent of the changes that he needed to bring in an institute for to make this Audi team a success. He talked about the timelines as far as their strategic objectives, and that he needed to right shift for them, push them further down the line. If indeed at the outset they said they'll be winning races and podiums in 2028, Mattia Binotto said, mate, it'll be more like after 2030 now. I didn't realise the multitudinous materiality of the ineptitudes and iniquities of this team. They are rubbish. Lest we forget, earlier on in the season, they couldn't even do pit stops quicker than 30 seconds. Why? Because they couldn't take the tyres off. This is what we're dealing with as far as the multitudinous incompetencies all over the shop as far as Sauber, soon to be Audi. Oh, and lest we forget, if indeed you harbour aspirations of winning races and championships, again, there are no guarantees in this sport, but 9 times out of 10, the champions, as far as these teams, they base themselves out of Middle England, Oxfordshire settings, Milton Keynes settings. Why? Because that's where the go-to intellectual property and personnel are located. That's why the likes of Red Bull and McLaren are so good. Ferrari is the exception that proved the rule, some will say. Where are they going to base themselves out of? Switzerland? What? Space though. How's this going to work? Switzerland. You haven't got time. Listen, F1 is a story told in tense. Nobody's got time to do all that travel, commuting back and forth to Switzerland and bloody Cologne and Germany, HQ, and then back into Europe for 9 out of 10 of the race. This makes no sense. It's a project for me, in my humble opinion, set to fail from the outset. But Mattia Binotto is there, and he's hired Jonathan Wheatley as team principal, who both of whom are god-tier minds. Saying of his coming back, he was asked the question, why did you even come back, Mattia? What was the point, mate? You left, you were an engineer, everybody thought you were brilliant. Team principal of Scuderia Ferrari, didn't work out necessarily. Not sure if you've got the minerals to lead a team from the front. Why even come back then? Mattia Binotto answered thus, that he missed racing, that he missed the smell of the paddock, the smell of the track. That he remarked again, he referred to Audi and their project as far as its nature, that it's most similar to Ferrari in the early 90s, a complete rebuild of a project, root and branch settings. Saying of Hülkenberg, he says he concurs that Hülkenberg's already signed. That's your banker driver signing. He says now that they've got the luxury of time to consider who will sit alongside Nico Hülkenberg in that other Audi seat. Why? Well, because everybody else on the grid is signed, right? All the main protagonists. Sainz now gone off to Williams, and he was in principal contention, right? Set to favourite to be the other chap in that Audi seat. Why? Because his dad has a fantastic relation with Audi, having won a gazillion races, Dakar Rally settings, WRC back in the day, with Audi as a manufacturer. And critically, Mattia Binotto had this to say of Mick Schumacher as another option, that they are considering him in real time. Mick Schumacher indeed could be in that seat as soon as 2025, and that is polemic and controversial in and of itself. Why? Because it divides the community. Many F1 aficionados, all they remember about Mick Schumacher is him yeeting it into the barrier multiple occasions, most famously at Monaco. He was a crash merchant, notwithstanding the fact that he has that name, that Schumacher name. And here's where the community does one of these now. It's Mick Schumacher, son of Michael. Keep fighting, Michael. How can you not fall in love with the romanticism that is the brilliant redemptive story arc of Mick Schumacher coming back into F1 and nailing it? That is Toto, the boy who cried wolf's stance. That's why he was so vexed, so angry at his one-time mentee James Vowles when James talked so disparagingly about Mick Schumacher, saying that he's not a great driver, and hence why we didn't consider him for the Williams seat. Oh, the humanity. Take it, this Mattia Binotto interview, because he's talked about Ferrari as well. Here's what he had to say. When asked about Ferrari, here was the question. As a privileged observer, what did you see in Vasseurs Ferrari? Again, lest we forget, for table settings, Vasseur superseded him as team principal of Scuderia Ferrari, which is a techie role in and of itself. Rob Smedley said that when you're on top of his time at Scuderia, when you're on top, the Italians love you. The Tifosi will love you. You won't have to pay for a drink or a meal whilst you're in Italy. That's the extent of the passion that the Italians have for that team. Ferrari is Italy's team. WTF, what do you mean? But when you're down and you're losing, they will spit at you in the streets. Of that team, here's what Mattia Binotto had to say in Vasseurs Ferrari. I would rather say what I saw in Ferrari, not Vasseurs Ferrari. He pushes back constructively on the question. He doesn't like the adjective nor the turn of phrase Vasseurs Ferrari. I still think there's bad feeling as far as Mattia Binotto towards the team in the way that ended. Honestly, why else would he say that? He continues, Fred was able to continue the project in the name of continuity. Fred, therefore, hasn't done anything that I wasn't doing already, says Binotto. He did not revolutionise a structure and functional organisation. Mattia Binotto saying, without saying, I don't know why they got rid of me in the first place, because I was doing what I was brought there to do. Frederick Vasseur isn't doing anything that I wasn't doing whilst I was Scuderia Ferrari team principal. He continues, he also made his own choices, but I repeat, if Ferrari wins, I am perfectly happy because I know the team and I know how much effort was spent to bring it to a certain level. Why? Because he's saying he was responsible for bringing that team to that certain level. He put that team upon his shoulders and tried desperately, kicking and screaming, to bring that team, Scuderia Ferrari, back to the mountaintop. Mattia Binotto is having a word right, in earnest, getting very techie. When asked who he thinks will win the championship in 2024, he concurs with your boy Cameron Ceesay and says Verstappen the driver's title, McLaren will win the constructors. Is Max still the strongest, they ask him? Yes, and he's proving it every single race, notwithstanding the fact that the car is less effective than others. McLaren et al. And I concur with that. This is a man who knows his Formula One. Now, some people have said Mattia Binotto is not a team principal, not a leader, doesn't have the innovation or the motivational capabilities requisite of a successful team principal. I'm not sure that's true. I understand that potentially his lot might be best spent in an engineering role. Such is his mind. I feel like that's the way he functions, but that's not to say that he can't ply his trade as a team principal. Again, he's already scoped out his remit that he needs to rebuild Audi in real time. That's his lot. Maybe you can do it with Jonathan Wheatley helping him. And again, Jonathan Wheatley's not a noddy F1 mind, lest we forget 2021 Abu Dhabi and how instrumental that dude was in getting Max Verstappen over the line and keeping Christian Horner's job. Had Max Verstappen not won that championship, you'll recall, Christian Horner would have no longer been team principal. How different might Red Bull Racing look now in that eventuality? Sliding doors effect. Oh, and by the way, here's your final one as far as Mattia Binotto's interview, because it gets techie. He does get techie because he got some things to say about Lewis Hamilton. I don't know why they always ask the question about Lewis. Well, you do know why they ask the question, because Lewis is always a hot topic now. Always first priority order on the docket. Why? Because Lewis Hamilton gets clicks. He's 7-time champion. He's GOAT settings. And again, is there a bigger story? Has there ever been a bigger story in history as far as a new signing in F1 than Lewis Hamilton going across the Scuderia Ferrari, in the context of Ferrari wanting to build themselves up no longer as a sports car brand, but a luxury brand? The symbiosis of Lewis Hamilton, brand Hamilton, and brand Ferrari is blockbuster. Nothing if not. It's humongous for Formula One. This is the story. This is the story where the New York Times start writing about Formula One, is it not? These news publications around the world that don't even touch F1, they were writing about this when it happens. And so I say all that to say this. It surprises me that when Mattia Binotto was asked about Sir Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari's signing of him, when asked whether he would have signed Lewis Hamilton, Mattia Binotto, the legend of Formula One, new Audi COO, had this to say. Would you have signed Lewis Hamilton if you were team principal at Ferrari? He says no, but he did well to go to Ferrari. I don't disagree with the decision. Why wouldn't you have signed Lewis Hamilton to Ferrari? Comes the follow-up question. Mattia Binotto had this to say, and I quote, because Ferrari had focused on other drivers. If the talent is Charles Leclerc, I think he is the one who should be accompanied to the objective in some way. Again, loose translation settings, barrier language settings, but you understand the sentiment. He's saying that when you have yourself a Charles Leclerc, a young, hungry lion, a prime Charles Leclerc, quickest A to B, quickest on the current grid in absolute terms, then you don't need yourself a Lewis Hamilton. Surely, therefore, if you are Scuderia Ferrari and had Mattia Binotto still been team principal at Scuderia Ferrari, if it were his decision to make, he's saying that you don't sign yourself a Lewis Hamilton. Why? Because it disrupts the development curve of one Charles Leclerc, as brilliant as he is. My old mate, friend of the channel, Peter D. Windsor, said as follows, that if you have yourself a Charles Leclerc, you don't sign yourself a Lewis Hamilton, you keep Carlos Sainz in there as a mentor to Charles Leclerc. You can bring him along, he can teach him lessons, transpose some of his not insubstantial racecraft onto the monogas, some say is the modern day Jean Lazy, Mr. Unforced Error settings, and that makes sense, does it not? You can see Charles Leclerc in real time is learning from Carlos Sainz. He's been brilliant this year. The guys and girls over at the race, Mitchell Mount, say that Charles Leclerc is in contention, as at the time of writing, for driver of the season. Undercover stealth drives at Belgium, as an example, that he's been almost as brilliant as Max Verstappen, if not as good. And I concur with that. Charles has been very, very good. But for me, I need to see him come along in real time. And who's gonna help him do that more? So Lewis Hamilton fans, I can hear them crying down the screen already that Lewis Hamilton, again, who better to learn from on the grid than Lewis Hamilton? And I understand it. The only problem is that naysayers will say is that Lewis Hamilton is 39, soon to be 40 years old. He will be 40 at the time when he drives a red car for the first time. You won't get testing in this year at Abu Dhabi. Why? Well, because Mercedes won't let him out of his contract in time. And that's why it's techie. 39. How long is Lewis going to hang around? Another 5 years, another 10? Carlos Sainz is 29, soon to be 30 years old. He's got more runway in front of him. Therefore, you can make that argument. But it's techie for Mattia Binotto to say that, right? To speak out so explicitly against the signing of one Sir Lewis Carl Davidson Hamilton, notwithstanding his material upside as far as all the other things, let alone him in a racing car. You see that Lewis and Charles are already talking, already comparing notes, already talking about making music together and going out to eat together, having dog dates, etc., etc. They will get along, and for the avoidance of doubt, Lewis will have a lot to teach Charles. Whether Lewis will cause Charles a problem in that car as far as being competitive in the race goes beyond nobody can debate that. You couldn't argue that in real time, and therein lies Mattia Binotto's point, that in race conditions, how can you argue in good faith that Lewis Hamilton won't cause Charles Leclerc problems in real time in 2025? Yeah, of course, you might make the argument, if you're going to do the F1 maths thing, hypothetical settings, that if King George Russell, first of his name, is roundly, comprehensively beating one Lewis Hamilton in qualifying, then how do you expect Lewis to beat Charles next year? If F1 maths is a thing that you can indulge in, how can Lewis expect to nail Charles Leclerc as quick as that dude is in qualifying trim? You would expect Charles to take more as a percentage of the whole. You would expect Charles to take more than 50% at the very least as far as the qualifying sessions in 2025, if indeed George can take most of them in 2024, right? But as far as the race pace and the racecraft, yeah, Jack Clear can say all he likes about Charles' racecraft and his ability to manage for different strategies in real time, and that's improving relative to his not insubstantial race qualifying pace. Of course he can say that all he wants, but you know, sometimes one swallow does not a summer maketh, and I need to see Charles Leclerc perform as good as he's been performing this year on a longer time horizon, not just half a year or 3/4 even. I need to see this over a couple of seasons when the pressure's on, when Sir Lewis, 39-year-old, 7-time champion, Mount Rushmore of F1, when he jumps into that red car alongside Charles Leclerc, that's a different level of pressure, something that he won't be used to. This isn't Sebastian Vettel back in the day on his last legs. This is Sir Lewis, Carl Davidson, Hamilton, 7-time champion, Mount Rushmore of F1 each and every single time. And with that dude in the same car as you, on the opposite garage of you, comes a completely different type of pressure to which I don't think modern day Jean Alesi is accustomed. That's my honest opinion. Fingers crossed it will be gangbusters and we'll be tuning in irrespective. But I think, you know, for the avoidance of doubt, Mattia Binotto might be onto something. I think Lewis Hamilton might cause Charles Leclerc next year, as at 2025, more problems than he has tools to deal with. How, ladies and gents, do you like your Formula One?